also instilled the values and held accountable her children. But because of these things, the whole Newtown, Connecticut situation affords us the opportunity, if we will take it, to have a meaningful civil dialogue without jumping to knee-jerk reactions that, quite frankly, all of the gun control proposals that have been thrown around as the supposed resolution for this horrific incident will actually do nothing to solve. If, on the other hand, we were to have that conversation, truly focusing on root causes and the like, before we determine what the recommendations are, we might actually get somewhere. When we come back from this break, I want to talk a little bit about the president's decision to appoint Joe Biden to lead a panel on what recommendations they propose. I know, but can only wait. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Feeling lonely this holiday season?
Looking for little human interaction?
Do you want to feel contact in certain special places?
Then why not go through security at an airport?
The TSA.
TSA agents are ready and standing by to give you a little something extra to feel thankful about this holiday season.
The TSA.
What are you waiting for? I want to check under your testicles.
Spending time with a TSA agent couldn't be easier. Simply book a flight departing from any American airport. When selected for a full body scanner, say no. You'll be pulled aside by a TSA agent, and that's when the fun begins. And you never know who your agent will be.
It could be me. Or me. Or even me.
But it's probably gonna be us. Take off your damn shoes.
The TSA. It's our business to touch yours.
Welcome to the Bureau of Womanhood Conformity. Independent thoughts are considered subversive because all must agree with our leader.
When it comes to women, preventative care should include coverage of contraceptive services such as birth control.
You see, if you don't believe government should pay for your birth control, you're not a real woman. Womanhood denied. If you refuse to accept that pregnancy is a punishment, you're denied as well.
I don't want them punished with a baby.
If you don't believe that abortions should be allowed for any reason, if you don't believe in aborting a child for being the wrong gender, and if you don't believe that stay-at-home mothers aren't real workers, you are not a real conformed woman.
His wife has actually never worked a day in her life. His wife has actually never worked a day in her life.
Finally, for your safety, if you oppose mandatory government health care, you will die.
They will be voting to say that women can die on the floor.
These standards and regulations were formed after our glorious victory in the war on women. Thank you for your cooperation and your conformity.
Welcome back into the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. I'm your host, Jim Lee. Thanks for being here this evening. Continuing on the second half of the Newtown, Connecticut situation. You know, it strikes me as interesting, those who are calling for additional gun control. Connecticut arguably has, depending on whose statistics you want to cite, perhaps the fifth most stringent gun control laws in the country. And it is a statistical fact that for those areas of the country that have the strongest gun control laws, violent crime is higher. But that notwithstanding, those who are arguing for additional gun control, thus far, aside from the very, very far left, who would advocate for the eradication of the Second Amendment, the confiscation of all weapons, regardless of when they were obtained, the confiscation of all ammunition and so forth. Aside from what I would, I guess, affectionately call the far left, you can use whatever pejorative you might like. I try and keep this discussion at least on an intellectual level. But those on the far left who would advocate for such an extreme position, it would seem to me that any argument for gun control is predicated on the notion that they are willing to accept some level of violence and some level of tragedy in exchange for some sort of, at least in my view, feel-good gun control. Let me explain. Let's say, for example, for argument's sake, that gun control regulation or gun control legislation is submitted that would ban the sale and possession of clips that held more than 10 rounds. So what we are saying is that it is acceptable that an individual who chooses to violate the law and commit an atrocity such as what was experienced in Newtown, Connecticut, that it's acceptable for them to get off 10 rounds before having to replace that clip with another one. And somehow that type of gun control is going to make a difference. Because I would point out that there are 300 million firearms in this country alone. And to my knowledge yesterday, none of those 300 million firearms jumped up by itself and took the life of another human being. Let's say it would be to limit the sale of handguns that were able to fire more than 5 bullets before having to reload. Thinking of revolvers or something along those lines. As you might surmise, I am not a firearms expert. Never claimed to be, and don't play one on television or here on the radio. But the fact of the matter is, there are handguns, firearms that with that kind of capacity. So if you were to propose legislation and gun control legislation that would restrict the purchase, sale, possession of a handgun that was able to fire more than 5 rounds, you are saying that it would be acceptable if someone consciously chose to commit a crime to take the life of another person that, let's just say for argument's sake, they were a darn good shot. And all 5 rounds were delivered into 5 different people. And 5 people are dropped dead. That is somehow acceptable, that we think that this gun control legislation is really going to make anything better. So ultimately, when we think about the morality of this discussion, about additional gun control in response to this horrific event that occurred in Newtown, Connecticut. To what moral end are we trying to achieve? Are we merely trying to assuage the guilt that we feel because as a country we have lost the respect for life, that we no longer value life such that any reasonable individual would for a second not just contemplate, or would not even consider, but would even contemplate the notion of going and shooting innocent people? Because the fact is, the gun control legislation and changes that are being proposed would do nothing. Just as the assault ban that was allowed to expire several years ago, the statistics tell us that for the decade that assault ban was in effect, there was no appreciable decrease in crime. And in fact, during that same time frame, just the opposite. That in those areas that had open carry or concealed carry laws, where people were not subject to the kind of restrictive gun control that we see in Detroit, Chicago, Connecticut, and other places like that, that in fact violent crime has gone down. And then there's another moral attribute that I think needs to be considered as well, and that's this. We live in a constitutional republic, and our Constitution, under the Second Amendment, guarantees us the right to bear arms, to keep and bear arms. And ultimately, that should be, from a legal and constitutional perspective, where this whole conversation needs to start. Because it's not law-abiding citizens owning firearms and ammunition that should be a concern. It's those who are not law-abiding, or those who are not sufficiently mentally stable, that we would no more allow them to purchase a firearm than we would allow them to take over and manage a daycare facility. We need to carefully consider what it is we're trying to accomplish, particularly as the conversation continues to stew as the president's new panel, led by none other than Vice President Biden, are going to purportedly come back with specific legislative recommendations as to what can be done. And if simply outlawing dangerous items made them go away, then, well, we wouldn't have any drugs, because cocaine, heroin, meth, marijuana have all been illegal for quite some time. And yet we still are dealing with the effects of their use illegally. And we certainly have to accept the fact that one of my favorites, if puns are outlawed, only outlaws will have puns. The same is true with guns. If guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. As I've recommended to others, tell you what, for sake of argument, let's go along with the confiscation of all firearms and all ammunition